Welcome to Parenting GPS, navigating your parenting journey. I'm Kari Kling, the host and creator of the show. As parents, we want to protect our children when they're sick. We want to do everything that we can to help them feel better. If we're not sure what's wrong, we take them to the doctor. But what happens when it's the parent that is sick? What happens when it's the parent who is sick and nobody can figure out what's going on and the parent doesn't feel well? How does that impact the children? How does that impact the relationship with your partner? Today, our guest is going to share her very personal story about this. Today's guest is Susan Casper, and I'd like to read her bio to you to introduce her. Susan Casper is the co-host of Sonoran Living on ABC 15, the longest running television lifestyle show in Arizona. This longtime journalist is also the host and producer of the two-time Emmy Award monthly series, Community Connection with Susan Casper. Susan has been a television personality for nearly 3 decades, earning the distinction of being the first African-American woman to anchor a prime-time newscast in Tampa, Florida. Susan joined ABC 15 Arizona in 2008 as an anchor and reporter before hosting Sonoran Living. She earned her communication arts degree from the University of West Florida, where she earned numerous journalism awards, including the university's first ever Society of Professional Journalism national title and a William Randolph Hearst honor. Susan has a passion for helping others, and when she's not on television, you will find her out in the community as a motivational speaker, volunteer, and advocate for women and girls. She is an executive board member for the Dress for Success Foundation in Phoenix and is a founding member of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women in the Phoenix chapter and member of the National Association of Black Journalists. Susan and her husband, Sydney, are avid sports fans and the proud parents of twin girls. And we're fellow twin moms. Susan, welcome to the show.
Oh, I am so honored to be here, Kari. I'm so used to being on the other side and introducing you, and you always share such great parenting tips with us. And you and I being twin moms, we talk a lot when we do the interviews, and we started talking about my medical journey, and I really appreciate you giving me this platform. And it took a while for me to get here. This is truly the first interview I've done in depth about my battle with endometriosis.
Endometriosis is a huge battle for so many people, and it's often known as the silent disease. And so, Susan, I'd like to, again, first of all, thank you for sharing such a personal journey. And both of us, our big hope is that if it helps even one person figure out what's going on, then we've done our job. But I'd like to ask you to begin by just sharing with us a brief description of your health journey. Where did it begin? How did you find out about endometriosis? And how long were you not feeling well before you figured it out?
Yeah, this is a very cathartic moment for me right now, because this is really the first time that I have kind of been able to get through the anger, truthfully, of how I felt, because I started feeling bad about 10 years ago. And I remember my co-host Terry O saying to me, we started anchoring and hosting together 10 years ago, and you were complaining then about not feeling well. And all of these years later, after countless doctor's appointments and countless, sitting there looking up what I was feeling and symptoms and what could this be, and going to doctors and saying, I think I have endometriosis, and then dismissing me. Fast forward 10 years, and I nearly died last year from endometriosis. And it's really, I have to give myself grace, because I'm finally here and I'm finally able to tell my story, and I'm healthy and doing well. And I said anger because the gaslighting that happened to me it was, and so many women and men have had the same issue. It's really a problem in healthcare. And I don't know if it's because we're rushing through appointments and we're not listening to patients. There are a lot of trends happening now where people are in medical experts are slowing down, but it was a real battle.
Hmm. And a lot more is coming to the front. In fact, recently, People magazine had the cover of Bindi Irwin with her 10-year battle. And so,
Mhm.
not only were you not diagnosed properly, and we're going to get into the more of the detail of what happened with endometriosis and your diagnosis and what happened to you in the second segment, but you were misdiagnosed so many times. You
Mhm.
were told you were depressed. Would you share with our viewers, please, a little bit of what that looked like and what you were told to do?
Yeah, and what it felt like.
Yes.
It was such an embarrassing time because I was told, "Oh, you're probably going through a little depression. Let's put you on an antidepressant." And having to, I remember hiding my pills,
Mhm.
hiding them in the medicine cabinet for fear that my husband would see them and think, "Oh my gosh, she's cuckoo," right? And I really was embarrassed by the fact that maybe I was losing control of myself because a doctor told me that I was probably needing some antidepressants. I was told to journal my food
Mhm.
because clearly it's got to be something that you're eating. I was told to take yoga. I was told to have vaginal rejuvenation because of the pelvic pain being so bad. Um, all of these things were what I was told at the end of a doctor's appointment. So imagine 10 years of that. And I had testing done, I had blood work done. I did all of the things that they asked me to do. I was getting all of my annual exams on time. They were all coming back negative. Everything looked good. But I knew my body
Mhm.
and I knew the bloating. I would wake up and by 11 or 12, I was looked like I was 7 months pregnant. I had such bloating. Every joint hurt. My lower back hurt. My lower abdominal area hurt. It hurt during intercourse. It hurt to urinate. I was constipated all the time. The symptoms were progressively getting worse and worse and worse. And then when the brain fog happened, oh, clearly you've got to be in perimenopause.
Right.
Clearly you're going through the change. So then that layer, hormone replacement therapy, I went through all of it, Kari. Everything. I was on troches and estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. They were throwing everything at me to try to get me back to some sort of normalcy. And I knew it was something else. And yeah, and I'm not saying that those things didn't help. Yeah, they helped. They were band-aids, and I felt a little better. I started eating clean. I'm a pescatarian. I have been for 6 years, so I don't eat any red meat of any kind, just seafood.
Mhm.
Um, but those things helped. It helped with the inflammation. It helped with some other things, but it certainly was not the real silent disease, which was endometriosis.
And so, Susan, how did you finally receive a proper diagnosis?
Well, I had a lung collapse,
Mm.
and the lung collapse happened June of 2021. I thought I was having an asthma attack.
Mm.
I've had asthma since a child, so I always have an inhaler. I have a nebulizer. Those were just common for me, and I felt like, we were having some, weather was kind of doing different things. I'm like, oh, it's probably environmental. So I was taking my inhaler, and I couldn't get up my staircase.
Mm.
And I told my husband, I got halfway up. It's crazy, but there's 17 steps on our staircase. And I got halfway and I could not pick my foot up. And I told my husband, I can't breathe. Shortness of breath, tightening in my chest. And at night when I would lay down, it felt like literally an elephant was pressing on my chest. That's how bad it hurt. So I had to prop myself up. I was sleeping sitting up. And this went on for days, Kari. And finally, my
Days
husband said,
after the 10 years.
days, right, right. And so finally, right. Well, that was right prior to the June attack, lung collapse. And my husband said, "We're going to the urgent care." I went to the urgent care, and the doctor happened to ask me, "Is there anything else you're feeling besides the chest? Because I can hear the wheezing." it's bad in both of your lungs. Is there anything else? And I said, yeah, I've got really bad lower abdominal pain. I don't know why I said that. I just said it because I was always in pain. I'd been in pain for a long, long time. And she goes, I think you need to get a CT scan. And I said, okay. She goes, I think you should. I think it could be something else going on. The next day, what do, Kari? We get up and go to work, right? We're working women. That's what we do. I was at work and I was on a shoot, and I was with a very dear friend, family nurse practitioner, Chris Adair. We were shooting a segment together at her clinic. And I said, oh, hang on, Chris, I got to take my inhaler. I've been having shortness of breath for several days. I was at the urgent care yesterday. They want me to get a CT, but I'll get it. But I'm just going to, just give me a minute. And she looked at me and she said, something's not right. She goes, I'm ordering you a CT right now. And she put stat across the top. The next day I went in and had a CT. It was Memorial Day weekend. And the following week, once the clinics opened back up again after the holiday, she called me and she goes, how are you feeling? And I could hear a very nervousness sound in her voice. And I said, I'm still having this, asthma attack. I'm still not able to breathe. And she goes, get to the emergency room right now. You have a pneumothorax. And I said, what? She goes, your lung has collapsed. Your right lung has collapsed. You've got to get to the ER. It was in the middle of COVID. My kids were upstairs in school, upstairs in the house. My husband was up front on a Zoom call, and I was in here on a Zoom call. And my whole world stopped in that moment. And we rushed to the ER. And within an hour, they were putting a tube in my chest. And I remember saying, and this is a true story, I looked at my watch and I said, how long is this going to take? Because my kids have a basketball game tonight. And the emergency room doctor, I thought he was going to lose it on me. He goes, are you kidding me? He goes, you're literally hours away from going into cardiac arrest because my lung had collapsed 30%. Now, mind you, I've been having symptoms for almost a week, ignoring them, going to work every day, picking up my kids, going to practice with them, just pushing through like we do as women, right? We are always pushing through. And he was a little annoyed. And at that moment, I was terrified. I realized I could be dying right now. And they stuck a tube in my chest. And he said, you're going to be here for 3 to 4 days until we get your lung fully inflated again. And that was the beginning of the end, because it happened 2 more times, 2 more lung collapses after that. Now, mind you, the doctors didn't know why my lung was collapsing. We figured it out, not me, but my amazing pulmonologist figured it out. But at the time, I didn't know why it was happening, Kari. I just was like, am I working too hard? And I am a workaholic, and I do overwork, and I'm nonstop all the time. So I just attributed it to that, not knowing it had anything to do with endometriosis.
Oh my goodness. And in the second segment, we're going to talk about how you figured that out, how your doctors figured that out. But I want to say, and I'll continue to say it, when we talk about self-care as a parent, so many times, most of the time, most parents put their own health, their own needs in front of the needs of their kids. And we're there for our kids in the basketball game. But we have to start listening to our bodies. We have to start saying, wait a minute, I need to take care of this. And Susan, you're sharing your story with us today. Could be a wake-up call for so many people. And when we come back from our break, I'm going to ask you to share more in depth about your journey. Thank you. Susan, we left off in the last segment with you telling us about your horrifying, traumatic experience and what you went through. But for those viewers out there that may not really understand what endometriosis is, could you please give a brief description of what that disease is, what happens?
Yeah, well, thank you again, Kari, for really shining a light on endometriosis. It is starting to become more mainstream, which is really wonderful. Endometriosis impacts about 6.5 million women in the United States, and it is a disease. Some call it a condition, but more and more health experts are referring to it as a disease. And as a person who nearly died from it, I'm definitely saying it is a disease. And with which, what happens is the cells that form inside the uterus, they start growing outside of the womb in places that they shouldn't. And it can affect, it can be very severe. It can cause infertility. And the pain can be very severe, everything from pelvic pain to lower abdominal pain to back pain, nausea, constipation, painful urination, bowel movement pain, pain when you have sexual intercourse. And the list goes on and on, because every year we're getting new and new symptoms added to that list. And in my case, a lot of the symptoms I said, plus a lot more on top of it, like shortness of breath and, you know, all of the things that were associated with catamenial pneumothorax.
And so when you were having these lung issues, as you said, nobody really attributed it to anything that you were having in terms of pelvic pain or abdominal pain. Nobody made that connection at the beginning for a long time.
No one, yeah, no one did. So in June of 21, when I had my first lung collapse, and then I had a second, and then last year I had my third. In between the second and third lung collapse, my pulmonologist, who I love dearly, Dr. Virginia Rowland, I remember she walked into the room and she said, "You're a pain in the butt." And I said, "Excuse me?" She goes, "Not you, but what your condition? Why is a woman of your age, of your health, you know, you're healthy, you're strong, having lung collapses?" And she really took a deep dive into the why I was having lung collapses between my second and my third one. She called me on a Saturday morning and she said, I didn't recognize the number. I almost didn't answer. I'm so glad I did, because it was a Saturday, and I picked up and I said, "Hello." And she said, "Hi, Susan, this is Dr. Virginia Rowland." And I said, "Hi, Dr. Rowland." She goes, "I know what you have." And I said, "What do I have?" She goes, "You have catamenial pneumothorax." And I said, "I have no idea what that is or even how to pronounce it." And she basically said it's when endometriosis gets in the bloodstream and it impacts, it can attach, the patches can attach to certain organs. And in my case, it attached to my lung, my right lung, which caused me to have the lung collapses. She goes, "Are you getting the shortness of the breath and the pains and all of the symptoms you were telling me about right before your menstrual cycle?" And I said, "Yes." She goes, "It impacts women 72 hours before your menstrual cycle or 72 hours after." And what's happening is, as the egg is dropping, you know, the menstrual cycle is happening. That's when the blood is being released out. And that's what the patches or the cells that we talked about that form outside of the womb start attaching themselves, because there's no place for them to go. There's no place for this blood to go. So in my case, it started building up in my lung. So after my third lung collapse, they told me I would have to have a lung surgery. It's called a pleurodesis, which is basically they kind of
pictures
scrape up.
of it right now.
Yeah. So these are images of the actual surgery. It's all done laparoscopically, and they rough up your chest wall, and then they adhere the lung to the chest. It's almost like sticking it like glue, just in hopes of keeping it from collapsing again. And this surgery is incredibly routine in some cases, but while they were doing the surgery, he biopsied out of my right lung endometriosis. He also found it in my diaphragm, and all of it was removed. So I was getting my stitches out after the surgery, and the doctor confirmed. They said, "Your labs came back, you had endo, so you absolutely have catamenial pneumothorax, and we're going to have to do a hysterectomy." And I'm thinking, next year. I just went through 3 lung collapses and a lung surgery. I think my body's had enough, right? And they said, "Nope, in 6 weeks." And I'm like, how am I going to physically, and then the other mentally, be ready to go back into another major surgery? But they said, "You have to, because we have to stop the estrogen, and endometriosis is caused by estrogen. And we got to get all of that, you know, we got to take the womb apart or to take everything out, you know, during the hysterectomy to stop it." So sure enough, I had the hysterectomy 6 weeks later. And I can honestly tell you, I live in fear every day, because there is no cure for endometriosis. And in my case, I have such a severe case of it. Only 3 to 6% of women have catamenial pneumothorax. So there's not a whole lot of research being done on it. I couldn't find hardly any case studies because I was trying to read up on it, but it's just so few and it's so rare. that it wasn't, there's just not a lot of studies on it. So I didn't know if it would come back, and it may, I don't know. So far I'm doing well. It's only been a year, but I'm hoping and praying. I've been on full hormonal suppression, which is of course what the doctors wanted me to be on right now until I can feel at a comfortable rate to bring, progesterone, testosterone, and all of the hormones that help us move and tick back into my body.
Well, Susan, let me ask you this, and you certainly have been through just an unbelievable health journey, and so many times we talk about self-care as a parent. We talk about an emphasis on self-care, and sometimes people say things that are pretty superficial about just take a bubble bath, have a glass of wine, go get a manicure. How has the idea of self-care, being that you've been through what you've been through, impacted your role as a parent and a partner with your husband?
Yeah, self-care is so much more, right? It really has very little to do with, bubble baths and getting your nails done and getting your hair done. Self-care is really about being an advocate for your body, understanding what is going on, being aware of it, being an advocate for yourself. And I had spoken to so many doctors about what I felt I was having, which was bouts with endometriosis that had been dismissed. And it was really difficult because I would be around here feeling out of my mind.
Yeah.
And I shared with you, we were on vacation for spring break when I had my absolute final straw. We were at Disneyland, supposed to be a magical time, and we were having a magical time until I started having hallucinations, and I literally lost it in the hotel room. And I remember, I get emotional thinking about it, looking at my kids. And they were like, Mommy is going crazy. And I was.
Yeah.
Because the endometriosis had taken over my body. It was in my blood. It was in my brain. It was all over. And I lost myself.
Yeah.
And when I came back from that trip, I was screaming at my kids and my husband. I'm like, I'm not going to go to the park today. You don't want me there. You can't. And they're literally sitting on the bed going, what in the world is happening?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, God, if you can just help me figure this out. Am I really going crazy?
Yeah.
And then I had the lung collapse. So thankfully, the collapse was the physical part that needed to happen so that the mental part made sense.
Well, and hopefully I have goosebumps just listening to you, and you've shared the story with me before. And hopefully your story and your willingness to share such a personal journey will help so many women. But I want to ask you, Susan, why do you think it took so long for you to have a proper diagnosis?
I will say, I said before, 6.5 million women in the US have it. The problem is 72% of women who are diagnosed with endometriosis are white women. Only 5% of Black women are diagnosed with endometriosis. And I appreciate you allowing me to talk about the racial disparities in women's healthcare, specifically as it relates to endometriosis, because the research has shown that Black women who are diagnosed with endometriosis are often diagnosed, Kari, 2.5 years after white women are diagnosed. So as I shared with you, I was telling doctors years and years ago what was going on. I was told to go take, crazy meds and yoga. Had they notified me, or at least we started on a path of hormone depression or suppressants back then, I maybe wouldn't have had 3 lung collapses, a lung surgery, and a radical hysterectomy at, 49, 50, 51 years old. So I know gaslighting is a real problem. And unfortunately, because Black women are not being put on a larger research scale, improvements are being made. More advocacy groups are fighting for women to be studied for endometriosis. Unfortunately, our wombs are being robbed at a higher rate because the infertility associated with endometriosis. And if we are lucky enough to have children, oftentimes we're not being given the same medical treatment and care when it comes to pain medications and different things.
Mhm.
And it's sad because it's disheartening to know that, definitive evidence has not shown that endometriosis is more common in white women than it is in Black women. It's just an assumption. And it's a misconception, unfortunately. And I am living proof of that. Only 3 to 6% of women in the country have catamenial pneumothorax.
Mhm.
I looked up the probably 8 case studies I could find. None of them were on Black women. As I know, the only person who's of color who has it.
Mhm.
And it's unfortunate because now we need to get, the World Health Organization and other people to have conversations about this, because
Right.
again, it is unfortunate. And I want to share, back in the 1970s is when the underdiagnosis of endometriosis in Black patients was first identified. And it was called, and I'm quoting here, it was called a white career woman's disease. That is how endometriosis was referred to in the 70s. And all it means is that, of course, that Black patients, we wait longer for endometriosis care. And unfortunately, decades later, it hasn't changed. And that's really unfortunate. And it's something that really needs to stop. And women of color in particular need to be taken more seriously about our pain thresholds and about our symptoms. And we need to be listened to and not gaslighted and not assuming it's something else,
Right.
when in fact it could very well be endometriosis, and in my case, catamenial pneumothorax.
Oh, an unbelievable story. And Susan, in the time that we have left in this segment, what personal message do you want viewers? We've talked about this, but what do you want our viewers to leave with, whether it's endometriosis or something else? If you don't feel right, if you feel that there's something wrong, you feel that you're not being listened to appropriately, what is your bigger message?
Yeah, my message is, we know our bodies better than anyone.
Mhm.
And they always say, follow your gut. And we have, as women, as mothers, we have a maternal instinct.
Mhm.
And if your mind and body is telling you something and you're going to a doctor who's not listening, find another doctor. I praise Dr. Virginia Rowland. I've talked earlier about Chris Adair, all of the doctors who I've come in contact with, Dr. Charles Bogue, Dr. Chirag Patel. These are doctors who listened to me, and they found a cure for me. And if you are not getting the answers that you want, women and ladies, please keep fighting, because there are great doctors out there. And I have to say, doctors don't know what they don't know. These
Exactly.
doctors were giving me their true, honest
Right.
medical expertise and advice based on what they had known or studied or what my symptoms were.
Right.
It took the digging
Right.
of a Virginia Rowland to really get to the root of the problem. And because so few studies are being done, we don't have a big, plethora of information out there. I hope that I am, a new case study. I
Yeah.
hope that there will be an abstract done. And I hope that I will help more women who may be saying, right before my period, I do have a shortness of breath and can't breathe and having difficulty doing day-to-day activities, picking up my baby, or, going to the store, picking up my kid, sitting on the sidelines, screaming for my children. That was the hardest thing after lung surgery, is not being
Right.
able to scream on the sideline for my
Right.
twin girls who were playing basketball at the time. And football, I had to just kind of go like this and wave my hands, because you
Yeah.
can't scream when you have one good lung and one bad one. So
Well, Susan, you really have become and are becoming an even bigger catalyst for awareness, for people to recognize that self-care isn't just, like we talked about, doing your nails or having a bubble bath. We have 2 questions from viewers who have questions for you specifically about this. And when we come back from our break, I'm going to ask you those 2 questions. We'll be right back. This is the part of the show where we take questions from you, our viewers. I like to call it your parenting destination. And we have 2 questions today, both from Arizona moms. And I'm going to read the first one to you right now. The first one is from Brittany L. from Lake Havasu City, Arizona. And Brittany asks, knowing that endometriosis can be genetic, how are you encouraging your twin daughters to be aware of the signs and symptoms of endometriosis? And do they have to go to a doctor more frequently now to monitor for possible onset?
Oh, Brittany, thank you for that question. That is a great question. And yes, right after I was diagnosed, I immediately, of course, we start thinking about our babies, right, as moms. And the doctor did inform me, yes, this is genetic. So I took my daughters to their at the time pediatrician, because they were only 16. They are now going to a gynecologist because they are 18. Immediately, they were both put on um, birth control to lower their hormone level considerably, to lower their the estrogen in their bodies, of course, because it is a genetic disease, and they do go to doctors much more frequently. Uh, we're very cognizant of low abdominal pain because both of my daughters have autoimmune diseases. One of them has HS, which is a chronic skin condition. The other one has hospitalization asthma. So any pains in the pelvic, their doctor's very well aware. They do CT scans if necessary, because I am definitely going to advocate for them, because they are of that age range when endometriosis is at its highest.
Right.
So yes, they do go to doctors, and they have been on hormone suppressant medications for a couple of years now since I was diagnosed.
And hopefully, if anything ever does start brewing, and we pray it doesn't, but they'll catch it in time and they'll never have to go through what you went through.
Absolutely.
Susan, our second question is from Regina from Casa Grande, Arizona. And Regina asks, how did your children react to watching you suffer, and what did you say to comfort them? I have two children, ages 7 and 9, and I also have a silent disease, and sometimes wonder what to say to them.
Oh, well, Regina, a beautiful question. And I'm sending love to you and your children, because it is not easy as moms to show weakness. We want to show strength in our families, and we want to show everything's going to be okay and mommy's going to be okay. I was very honest with them, and my daughters are older than your children. When they're a little older and they're already having a menstrual cycle, it's easier to talk about female issues. Um, but I was honest, and I think that as children, they are owed that. They deserve the truth. I explained to them every step of the way what was happening. The hardest part was, it was COVID at the time when I had my lung collapses, and they could not come into the hospital. And I remember looking out my window, and they drove their car up and they were waving from outside, and I couldn't hug them and let them know mommy was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that was very, very, very hard.
Yeah.
But we FaceTimed, and I talked to them, and I was honest with them about being honest with me about how they feel. And it did open up dialogue, because Sierra was having some problems that she wasn't telling me about with her menstrual cycle. So again, back to the question from Brittany, I was able to focus on that because I was honest with her about the symptoms. I told her how I felt, and she's like, I think I'm having that. And she was much more aware.
Yeah.
So I just say, keep the lines of communication open, be truthful with your children. Obviously, if you can take them to a doctor's appointment and let them see that everything is going to be okay, that might help. And I don't know what silent disease you're dealing with, but I think truth is always going to win in situations like this. And also showing vulnerability. As I expressed earlier, when I had my episode in California, I sat back down with them and I said, that was really scary, huh? Mommy was going through something. And they were like, yeah, we didn't know what was happening. And now we can laugh about it. But during the moment, it wasn't anything that I could even explain. But I did go back and reassure them that I appreciate you being there for mommy, loving mommy through that. And now we're on the other side.
That's so awesome. And Susan, as a person who works with parents, I just want to also add that if you see your kids going through something like that, they're wondering, and they keep telling you, I'm okay, it's okay, keep asking those questions, keep getting those lines of communication open, whether it's through texting, writing in a journal, but keep those lines of communication open. And
Mhm.
Susan, once again, we could talk about this for such a long time, but we are just about out of time. And so what I'd like to ask you to do right now is to share, how can people find out more information? What are some resources? How can they follow you on social media, and anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I would like to say there thankfully is a lot of research and resources out there. We're starting to see more and more when it comes to endometriosis. I have to give lots of love and lots of credit to Indo Black, which is a nonprofit that was such a huge resource for me. Women of color loving on each other, sharing stories. The website is endoblack.org. There you can have discussions with other women. They post a lot of great articles, and they talk to celebrities about endometriosis and different things that they're dealing with. We call ourselves Endo Warriors. So I want to give lots of love to Lauren Corngay, who is the founder of that organization. She's been a true support system for me. And Sisters, that's spelled cysters.org, is another resource that has great information on it as well. And of course, I'm on social media, so you can follow me on Facebook or Instagram, Susan Casper TV on IG, and Susan Casper Smith on Facebook.
Well, thank you for sharing those resources. And before we end, and I have a quote from you, I just want to remind everybody, no matter if you're a man, if you're a woman, if you're a woman of color, if you're not a woman of color, if you feel that something is wrong, don't let somebody talk you out of it and try to say, no, no, pursue it, advocate for yourself, be your own hero. And speaking of heroes, Susan, I like to end every show that I do with a quote. And your quote that you gave me really sums up how you have handled this entire journey for more than 10 years, and what you were doing with the information that you've learned now. And your quote is, I walk in grace and run in excellence. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.